MiFID II, finally here. The biggest change to European financial rules in a decade is off to a smooth start. But are firms prepared for the long-term impact? Andrew Stoltmann is the president of the Public Investors Arbitration Bar Association. He joins us from Chicago. Andrew, what are the main implications for US firms now that MiFID II is actually up and running?
Yeah, I think it might be a little flying under the radar right now for U.S. firms, because there are going to be some really thorny coordination issues between the rules of the EU and the rules here in the United States. And make no mistake about it, any firm here in the United States that trades European stocks or European bonds is going to be affected by these new rules and regulations. So it's actually a pretty big deal.
And I want to mention that Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg News, competes to provide a range of services for firms complying with MiFID II rules. Let's just make that clear. I also want to point to a map here in our Bloomberg. It's 5370 in the Bloomberg chart library, where you can see that there are many countries in Europe that still don't have the rules completely in effect either. The green countries are fully transposed. The blue countries are still working on it. How long before we see MiFID II completely in effect, Andrew?
Yeah, I think it's going to take a little bit of time. I mean, realize there are literally 1.4 million paragraphs of this rule. The compliance costs so far have been over $20 billion, and these costs are going to continue to rise over the course of the next 2 to 5 years. One of the biggest issues with the new rules are record keeping. The number of records that have to be kept with respect to minutia, with respect to trades, prices, and other information is absolutely extraordinary. So I think firms are really going to be hit at the bottom line with respect to how much it's going to cost to comply with these new rules.
Andrew, is there such a thing as regulatory arbitrage when it comes to MiFID II, given the diverging regulatory landscapes of the US and the EU?
Yeah, that brings up a really good point, because what we're seeing here in the United States is we're seeing a rollback of Dodd-Frank, but yet in Europe, we're seeing increasing regulation. So there is going to be a difference between those two regulatory infrastructures for the foreseeable future. And I think there are going to be instances where firms can comply with rules in the United States, but not in Europe, and vice versa. So I think the happiest people with respect to these rules, besides investors, are going to be European lawyers and American lawyers.
And of course, it has the potential, Andrew, doesn't it? It reaches beyond, banks and financial companies in London, in Frankfurt. I mean, anyone that trades stocks or bonds around the world, European stocks or bonds around the world, has to comply that. So this isn't a European-centric issue, is it?
No, it's not. It is a global issue. And as of right now, with respect to this legislation, it appears as though Europe is taking the lead in cleaning up the securities industry. Remember, post-2008, there are literally hundreds of millions of people out there that simply don't trust the markets. There have been people who have said the markets are rigged, and we can obviously debate whether that's true or not. But the point is that this piece of legislation is attempting to restore credibility in the markets. Europe is taking the lead on this, and it'll be fascinating just the comparison between Europe and the United States.
Andrew, tell us what these legal entity identifiers are, these LEIs.
Yeah, there are just another of the 1.4 million paragraphs of legislation, and these are going to be entities that have to be complied with, that have to be followed with, and it's simply a regulatory nightmare for a lot of the firms that actually have to deal with these entities.
Yeah. Andrew, in your capacity in what you do, have you had any MiFID inquiries, or do you anticipate that there will be any MiFID inquiries?
I think at the highest levels, in terms of the banks and brokerage firms here in the United States, they already have their in-house lawyers working on this. I won't say around the clock, but extensively working on it. Remember, $20 billion worth of compliance cost already, and it's just getting implemented. So this is going to be a boom for a lot of the lawyers that do the securities transactional side as opposed to the litigation side, and I think we're just getting started right now.
Andrew, is it too early to be talking about MiFID III?
That is a really good question, because the first version started in November of 2007. The Great Recession hit. Over the course of the last 10 years, they've been amending these rules. So I think it might be too early to talk about the third iteration, but it's coming.
Okay. Andrew, I think most firms would say, let's hope not for a while. Our thanks to Andrew Stoltmann, President of the Public Investors Arbitration Bar Association, joining us there from Chicago.